And Jay Hodge wrote in wondering if I've made a video about all the memorabilia on my back wall here. I haven't done one of those in a while, so I figured it was a good time to do it. So let's check it out.
We're actually going to start over here, though, with the Mac SE30 here in the background. This I got off of eBay a couple of years ago, actually, right before the pricing on these things got ridiculously high. It still works. I haven't booted it up in a while, but it is there. Here is our Apple IIgs, which if you watched my retro review, you saw that we had a little bit of a smoking issue with the power supply, so I have to get that power supply repaired, but the 2GS does still work, and it's going to stay here for a while, just not in a working form, so be on the lookout. What I do in here is I keep a lot of my cables and things that I often get at frequently, so a lot of my adapters and everything I keep inside of this little stand here so that I can get at them quickly, so that is what is in the back there. Then over here, we have a picture of the space shuttle that my friends and I took in Cape Canaveral during the last couple of missions. I'll put a link to all my space coverage. We've done some really cool stuff, and we've had some really exciting access to the facilities at NASA as a result of that coverage. It was some other projects I was doing prior to the YouTube channel kind of taking off, and that brings us right to this shiny object here. This is my little trophy that I got for surpassing 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. That came in not too long ago, and we have a live stream of that unboxing, which was really fun. So that was a great milestone, which was thanks to all of you who were a big part of that. Down here, I've got a plug-and-play Atari controller. This is one of those games on a controller thing, but it reminds me a lot, of course, of the original paddle controllers that I had on my 2600 that are hidden somewhere in the basement down here. I'll have to find it. This is a random VHS tape that I have. Down here are some older game cartridges. So we have two Sega 32X games. We have Afterburner, which I got probably in 1997, maybe 96, and Space Harrier. These were a very short-lived game console from Sega. It was a add-on to the Sega Genesis that completely bombed, and I got the system, the little add-on system, for $29, and these games were like dirt cheap at that point. So I picked up a bunch of that stuff when it happened, when that crash occurred on the Sega add-on there. This is some Atari 8-bit cartridges. My wife had an Atari 800. It's in the back of the basement. I have to get it out and play with it at some point. And these are cartridges that you would plug into the 800. It ran on floppy disks, but they also had games on cartridges too. Down here, we've got a couple of original Sega Genesis cartridges. This is Championship Pro-Am, which is the Sega Genesis version of RC Pro-Am. Really fun game. And then we got Ghouls and Ghosts, which is another one of my favorites. I've never finished the games. It's so freaking hard. But this is, I think, the third or fourth game that I bought for the Sega Genesis back in 1989 or 90. And there is my original Sega Genesis controller. I don't think this one works anymore, which is why it ended up here. Below that, we have a couple more controllers. This is an Apple II controller. This is an original Apple joystick, and that connected up with my Apple IIe and my 2C and my 2GS, so that was a fun little relic to have there. And then, of course, we've got an original Nintendo controller. And we'll zoom back out. We'll go back up to the top here. I have a Sega Genesis. This is my original Sega Genesis. This is a first-generation version. I got it right when it came out in 1989. I was so excited to see it at my Toys R Us. In fact, it showed up earlier than I expected it to. And it was an awesome thing to add to my collection and get some 16-bit gaming going on. Little did I know it would be such a big success. I was a fan of the Master System because I always liked the underdog, and Sega Genesis was something that I thought was going to have some potential, and it sure as heck did. Below that, we've got some representatives of Nintendo. So I had a 8-bit Nintendo back as a kid, and I never did own a Super Nintendo, but I bought one not too long ago to use some flash cartridges with, and it came with a couple of games, so I have just some examples of Super Nintendo games back there just to be fair to have Sega and Nintendo fairly represented. Got a Hi 8 Handycam here, just randomly. It was my dad's old camcorder. This was actually a pretty decent camcorder back in its day because it recorded in stereo, and the video quality was pretty nice on it too. Not digital though, so at some point I'm going to have to transfer all the tapes over from that thing. I'm sure we've got a lot of family memories locked on 8mm tape. Here I've got some examples of Nintendo games. This is a mix of my wife's collection and mine. My wife is actually a big Nintendo person. I didn't realize it until we were dating for a while, and I took out an emulator, and she was all over Zelda for so long. So that was her favorite game as a kid, was Legends of Zelda. She had Bubble Bobble. I think this Mario Brothers Duck Hunt was hers also. I got two of these. I don't know how I ended up with two of them. And then Strider, Duck Hunt, Operation Wolf, and Batman are mine. I got more in the back too. But I'm a big fan of old video games, as all of you know. Now, this was my first computer. This is a Timex Sinclair 1000. My father bought this when I was probably in kindergarten or first grade. I had just gotten done with a computer class, and I really wanted a computer. We couldn't afford a computer at the time because they were so expensive, but he found this on there was this show on this New York TV station, and they would have this crazy reverse auction guy screaming and yelling, and they would just keep lowering the price until people started buying it. And that was what my father bought it from. I'll have to look and see if I can find some video of that show, but this was it. It ran on cassette tapes. These are actually cassette tapes from back in that era there, as I drop it here. And you had to plug in a cassette recorder to it, and the games and software would load from these tapes. There was no floppy drive on this particular device. The other option was you could type them in, which took forever on that membrane keyboard. What is not shown is the memory expansion. I think this only had 2K of RAM, and that memory expansion added a little bit of extra RAM to the mix here. So not a very powerful computer, but it was my first computer until we could afford that Apple. So there you go. Below that, we've got my ColecoVision controller. This is my original ColecoVision controller from back in the 80s, along with my all-time favorite Coleco games. So Zaxxon was one that I played quite a bit. I did play a lot of Q*bert on my ColecoVision, as I did Cosmic Avenger, Carnival, Bump and Jump, which was like a really big favorite of mine. And then Destructor, which used the driving add-on that I had for the ColecoVision. Coleco is just an awesome system. If you've never played with it, start doing some research, do some emulation. It wasn't arcade perfect, but it was such a light years ahead system over the 2600 back in the early 80s, and what a blast that system was. Really, really good stuff. Below that, I got a bunch of random floppy disks. So this is Operation Wolf for MS-DOS. I got some 3.5-inch discs from my Apple II GS, and then Skyfox here was an old Apple II game that I bought probably back in the early 80s, and most of these discs still work too, believe it or not. Pretty cool stuff. So move over to the next row. I've got a couple of wax packs. I bought these Return of the Jedi cards recently, and there were some other random cards that came with it. It's like just the notion of having an unopened pack of trading cards from the 80s is, for whatever reason, appealed to me at the time. So that's what I went with. This shelf here, I just wanted to fill up with some random stuff, so I found a bunch of DVDs and GameCube games and some Xbox games just to kind of fill up the shelf there. So that's what we have over there. Here's my Atari 2600 shelf. So I have an original 2600 controller. These are a bunch of my games that I had from back in those days. And Combat at the top was the pack-in game. So that came packed in with our Atari 2600. I remember my dad bought Space Invaders and Home Run when we got it. And then I added some other games later. One of my favorite games on Atari is this one. This is my actual cartridge from when I was a kid, The Empire Strikes Back. I still play that game in emulation quite frequently. It's a lot of fun. A lot of you ask about the Blockbuster case here, and I'll have you know this is not an overdue game. For a while, Blockbuster used to let you buy the game after you rented it. I was part of that Blockbuster Netflix alternative for a while, and it was great. I could see why Blockbuster went out of business, because you would go to the store and never have to pay for anything, including some of the games. So you could rent the game with your coupon and then just hold on to it and buy it for whatever the used price was. So that's what that was there. So the next level here, of course, we had our Return of the Jedi card, and then we have some Tron cards here. This thing right here, let's get straighten it out again. Oops, it's going to fall. See, that was why I shouldn't touch these things. This thing right here is a compact iPack, and it is a little personal digital assistant, kind of an alternative to the Palm Pilot. And what was significant about this one is it ran the Windows Pocket PC operating system, and it's a really nice device. There was these little cartridges that you could, or sleds that you could slide it into to add functionality. So they had memory add-ons, they had a PC MCIA slot so you could put in Wi-Fi cards and whatnot. Really slick device. And what was really cool about this is that it had a reflective screen, so you could see it out in direct sunlight, and then it would backlight when you were not in direct sunlight. So really advanced PDA for the time, and I got a lot of use out of it back in the day. And then if we go back in time a little bit more, we've got a Newton here. This is a Newton 120. Now I bought a Newton 110 back in 1994, which was, I'm going to do a retro review on this when I do my next one, because this is a really, I think it was way ahead of its time, but a really cool platform for a personal digital assistant. They really got creamed by Palm Pilot because they were too big. I think they were too ambitious in what they were trying to achieve with the Newton platform, but it was a very cool device for the time, and maybe I'll do a retro review to show you exactly all the things that it could do. This is the 120, so this was the third iteration of the Newton. I had the 110, which actually looks like the 120, but It was a little slower, and I think, maybe it wasn't this one. I think the 130 had a backlit screen, but they kept improving on it, but they never quite got it. And of course, when Steve Jobs came back to Apple, he killed it. This is the LaserTag star sensor. I did a retro review of LaserTag a few years ago. I'll put a link to that in the video description. And then up here, we have a Game Boy Advance that still works. I just have to get some batteries in it, and an old zip disk, an old Zip 100, which is was a great platform for the time because you can get 100 megabytes on each of these disks. And back then, disk space was very expensive, and these were very useful disks to have.
This channel is brought to you by my Patreon supporters. If you want to help the channel, you can by contributing as little as $1 a month. Head over to lon.tv/Patreon to learn more. And don't forget to subscribe. Visit lon.tv/S.